Sairam, everyone. Welcome to Effective Leadership Workshop Series Session 7 on Conflict Resolution by Dr. Ranga Jayaraman. Before we go on to the session, here are a few Zoom keeping announcements. Kindly stay muted and keep your videos on. Feel free to type in your questions in the Zoom chat box at any time. They will be moderated throughout the session. If you'd like to unmute and ask a question instead, please use the hand raise option under the participants tab, and we will call you at an appropriate time without interrupting the flow of the session. We will be using breakout rooms for this workshop. Check out the timer at the top to know how many minutes you have left in your breakout rooms. Even if you have left it by mistake, you will be able to join it back by clicking on the breakout room icon. So we've completed 6 successful sessions so far. The last one was giving and receiving feedback by Mr. Arun Balraman. We spoke about the various roles we play in our lives and how we can best receive and give feedback through a couple of exercises that we did. We also spoke about fixed and growth mindsets and to focus on the what and not who is giving the feedback. The recordings of all the sessions are available on the ELWS website. Now, moving on to the session for the day, we have Dr. Ranga Jayaraman with us to share with us about conflict resolution. Dr. Ranga's current passion is to empower neurodivergent individuals to find meaningful, rewarding, and sustained employment, and to help organizations in their journeys to embrace neurodiversity inclusion in their workplaces. In a past life, Dr. Ranga was an accomplished senior executive of digital transformation with expertise in providing innovative and cost-effective solutions and services to enable and support business strategy and growth in the higher education and information technology industry. Dr. Ranga's focus while in Stanford Graduate School of Business was to transform higher education through an innovative application of information technology together with instructional design, online educational assets, design thinking for process redesign, improving user experience, and data-driven business decisions guided by a comprehensive business and technology architecture. Swami came to Dr. Ranga's awareness in a dramatic way on the 13th of April in 1972 during the break after he completed his high school. Since then, Swami has been playing with, protecting, and guiding Dr. Ranga in a variety of overt and subtle ways, never giving up on him in spite of his many detours, past and present, on his spiritual journey. As part of his ongoing reformation process, Swami had Dr. Ranga play devotional coordinator and president roles in Central San Jose Sai Center and regional devotional coordinator in Region 7. Dr. Ranga infrequently writes about his life experiences and perspectives that he wishes to share with others in his blog. The links to his LinkedIn profile and the blog are listed on the ELWS website. With that, we welcome you, Dr. Ranga. Over to you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Madhu. Sairam, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for taking your time in a Sunday afternoon, a hot Sunday afternoon, and spend that time with me in terms of exploring this topic of conflict resolution. I'm just curious, is there anybody who in their life so far have never encountered any conflicts? And if that is the case, please raise your hand, because I want to virtually shake your hand, because you're a very unique person in that regard. Conflict is what life is all about. When Swami says, love my uncertainty, he's telling us that conflict is part of the design of the universe, okay? And what we're going to focus on is not that extremely broad concept of conflict. We're going to try to focus on in the context of leadership, in the context of, dealing with other people to get something accomplished. So let me start out with one statement, which is conflict resolution is really all about the power of effective conversations, because core to resolving conflicts is the ability to have effective conversations. So there are two keywords there. One is conversation, the other one is effective. And we're going to explore both of these as we kind of go along. A broad overview of what we're going to do today is a conflict is a disagreement, a struggle within a person, or it could be between or among people. It need not be just, one-to-one. It could be between, between group of people. But it's important to recognize a conflict can also exist just within ourselves. And I'll come back to that a little bit later on. Now, we all have a choice to make as to how we approach resolving a conflict. By the way, when you choose not to attempt to resolve a conflict, you are making a choice. You simply are choosing to avoid the conflict. Now, what we're going to do in this module is we're going to review different approaches as to how you can go about resolving conflict. And we're going to discuss some principles and some practices for effective conflict resolution. And in the limited amount of time that we have, we're going to try to see if we can do some quick practice, the learnings in a few exercises. Does that sound good to people? Because if that doesn't sound like what you wanted out of this session, now would be the time to sort of exit the plane, as they say. All right. So I have a set of learning objectives for you for this session. And they're pretty straightforward. Understand what the sources of conflict are. Review approaches to conflict resolution. And most importantly, we're going to focus on the application of 7 habits of highly effective people for collaborative conflict resolution. Any conflict that's really worthwhile in life, it's going to require a collaborative conflict resolution approach where both sides of the conflict can come out with satisfactory and, better yet, a win-win type of resolution. Now, the next point in terms of learning objective is, if any of you think that you're a good conflict resolver, or you're really bad at conflict resolution and you're never going to be good at conflict resolution and all that, that's not a good way to think about anything in life. Okay, growth mindset says that regardless of where we are, we can apply energy and effort and improve from where we are, right? So appreciate that the ability to engage in an effective conflict resolution approach is a learnable and a masterable skill. And I hope, out of this session, you would leave that with a commitment, regardless of where you think you are, how good you are, or how not good you are, you're going to commit to developing your skill. Is that reasonable set of learning objectives to put on you guys? Or is that too heavy for it's Saturday afternoon? Okay, I'll take silence as an agreement. Okay, what is a conflict? A conflict can be a struggle within oneself, or it could be a disagreement between people or groups, as I said. It is important to learn to recognize where the conflict arises from. And conflicts, by the way, can come from many, many different places, okay? It could arise out of difference in understanding between you and the other person. It could arise out of needs and wants or goals versus where you are and versus what you want and what you need. It could come out of perception, or rather a misperception. It could come out of a piece of information that came to you that you are interpreting in a certain way, whereas maybe the giver or the sender of that information really intended it to be something different. It could come out of differences in power. It could come out of pride or prejudice, status, feelings, interests, priorities, values, pretty much, anything that defines human life in any way can actually become a source of conflict. So how do we, let's do this just so that we can make this a bit real. I'm going to send you a link in the chat window. Give me 1 second. Let me find the chat, and I'm sending it to everybody. What I sent you just now is a Jamboard, Google Jamboard, and you should all be able to click into it. That'll bring you to this whiteboard, and you can use simply the sticky on here, the sticky note, to just write out. Don't have to get really elaborate. You can describe in a sentence or two something, a current or a recent conflict that either you've experienced or you're experiencing, and where you think it arises from based on what we just did. And Madhu, if you don't mind, let's keep track of time, and let's give about 5 minutes, actually 3 minutes, 3 minutes for this. You can use the sticky that's right here below the selecting. That'll be the easiest way to sort of try to write something. And don't worry, you're all anonymous, so nobody is going to know who is putting up which conflict, okay? Excellent. You're all getting the hang of it. Great examples. By the way, it's good for everyone to come up with the conflict, even if you're not going to post it, because some of the subsequent exercises are going to build on the conflict that you came up with. There's a really good one just now.
We have about 30 seconds left. The time is up, Uncle.
Terrific. Thank you very much. By the way, those are extremely nice examples. Take a moment to sort of look at some of the ones that people have posted. There's some really very, very attractive ones for me here. Never-ending conflict between the lazy me and the hardworking me. Okay, that's a beautiful example of a conflict within oneself. It is one. Conflict with spouse, different day-to-day priorities. That's a good one. daily routine, disagreement with spouse on when children should wake up or go to bed. So value systems are different. One of the recent conflict was when trying to convince my father that he's valuable when he had a lot of regret and negative perceptions about himself. That's an incredible one. I mean, often as people get older, and I'm saying this, recognizing it in myself, and we may develop a lot of regrets. I should have done this, I should have done that. Has my life been really worth it? Am I of any value to someone? That's an internal conflict, and you may actually experience it as a son or a spouse or a daughter. Yeah. So excellent example. Thank you very much for bringing that up. Now, the one thing that pretty much none of you did is, what is the source of that conflict? Is it a understanding, or is it an expectation, or is it a difference of opinion, or whatever it is? Okay, you don't have to do it right now. Keep that in the back of your mind as we go further along. Okay, so excellent examples. Now what we're going to do is, sorry, I didn't share with the okay, I'm already sharing the computer sound, so that's good. We're going to watch a little clip, and it's a very brief clip from a movie called Erin Brockovich. What I'd like you to do is to watch that clip, listen to the clip, with the objective of trying to figure out whether there are conflicts that are there in the air, okay? And what maybe different characters may be thinking or feeling. So that's kind of what you're trying to get out of watching this, okay? So here we go.
Mr. Foyle?
In the interest of putting this whole thing to rest, PG&E is willing to offer the Jensens $250,000 for their home.
$250,000?
In terms of land value out in Hinckley, Mr. Masery, we feel that's a more than fair price.
How about in terms of medical expenses? $250,000 isn't going to come close to what this family's going to have to spend on doctors.
I understand they've had a bad run of luck, health-wise, and they have my sympathies. But that's not PG&E's fault.
You're kidding, right? Look at these readings. PG&E's own technicians documented toxic levels of hexavalent chromium in those wells on numerous occasions. Everything the Jensens have had is proven reaction to exposure to hexavalent chromium. They have had
breast cysts, uterine cancer, Hodgkin's disease, immune deficiencies, asthma, chronic nosebleeds.
A million things could have caused those problems. Poor diet, bad genes, irresponsible lifestyle. Our offer is final, and it's more than fair.
Wait a minute. I thought we were negotiating here.
$250,000 is all I'm authorized to offer.
I'll present your offer to my clients. I doubt they'll accept.
Mr. Masery, before you go off on some crusade, you might want to remember who it is you're dealing with here. PG&E is a $28 billion corporation.
$28 billion? I didn't know it was that much. Wow! 28 billion! Holy cow!
Okay. So at this point, what we're going to do is, Madhu, if you are prepared to break the group into different breakout rooms, I'm going to send out, here's what we're going to do in terms of this exercise, okay? So in your breakout groups, you're going to analyze this clip a little bit in terms of what were the desired outcomes these different sides were trying to accomplish. and what are the conflict that is evident in watching this few minute clip. Okay, so there's just basic analysis of what you saw, and let us do it this way. How many breakout groups are we going to have, Madhu?
We'll have 6, Uncle.
6. Okay, so what I'd like to do is in each of your breakout groups, I would like you to select one person as the scribe, so to speak, and that person towards the end of this exercise, when there is a minute or two to go, we'll just document it in another post-it in a different Jamboard, which I will be sending out to everybody after you guys break out into the room. Okay, so let's take about I want to say 7 minutes for this exercise. Okay, so Madhu will give a warning once it's 5 minutes in. So you have 2 minutes to sort of quickly summarize it in a, what you guys found out as the desired outcome and the evident conflicts. Okay, so while you're breaking out, I will send the link to the Jamboard. Okay.
So, Uncle, if you can post it in the chat box, and then I open up the room so everybody will have the links already.
Yes, let me do that right now. Control C, chat. Okay, everybody should have now access to that Jamboard. Okay, so we're back in the main room. Let me just go to my share. All right, so let's take a quick look at some of the things that you guys identified. PG&E saw the company as a separate entity, created boundaries, felt less human, didn't want to take ownership of the variables at stake. Desired outcome is compensation to cover health repercussions, whereas PG&E was make this problem go away. And the difference in ideologies for PG&E, just another lawsuit, but for Erin and team, it is not just about a lawsuit. Okay. Corporation is not ready to take responsibility. Okay, you guys got, clearly saw in this clip the nature of the conflict that was present, right? Two different sides. What do you guys think were the power structure? Were they equal or were they quite different? They were quite different, right? I mean, you've got a giant corporation, and on the other side is a few families that have been impacted by the consequences of some of the actions that the company has gone through. Okay, so let's actually go back into, give me just 1 second here. Okay, are you able to see my screen clearly?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. So you all took a quiz, or at least maybe a subset of you took a quiz before the session, and there was really a set of scenarios, and some of them you might have been able to relate to, and others might have felt a little bit contrived. Somebody said that I'm not married, so I'm not able to imagine a situation of having a conflict with your spouse. That means, you're in a good shape in terms of getting married. So what you saw was a set of scenarios, and you had your responses, and hopefully everybody saw the email response that came back evaluating your response in terms of a particular approach that you took to a given conflict. Okay. So what we're going to do is to really try to understand these different approaches that one can take to conflict resolution. And there are two aspects to this. It's called a dual concern model in terms of, problem resolution or conflict resolution. One is how much concern for yourself in terms of this situation that you have. Okay, so the attention and energy that I'm willing and able to bring into the conversation to influence you. Okay, because we're all trying to influence others when we're dealing with a conflict. Now, the other dimension is concern for others. the attention and energy I am willing and able to bring into the conversation to be influenced by you. Okay? One is about me influencing you, the other is about you influencing me. Now, if we are not trying to approach it with a balanced way between those two, then we're going to end up in potentially some of the approaches that are not going to be very effective. And I guess you guys probably saw some of the interactive, the explanation of what those things are. And we're going to take now some time to really look through them, okay? So the very first one approach is avoiding conflict. You don't want to deal with it. And the graphic is meant to suggest, hey, I just don't want to deal with it, right? So the characteristic of that approach is you are not comfortable facing the conflict. Or you might say, let me wait and see. Maybe it'll just work itself out. Or you just simply want to withdraw from that situation. And you can do that in many different ways. You can make a joke. You can change the topic. Or you even pretend like there is no problem. And kind of really what you're trying to do is to really not engage, okay? You're trying to maintain neutrality, if you will. Now, it's not the case that any one of these conflict resolution approaches are always not to be engaged in or anything like that. Under certain circumstances, this approach may in fact be appropriate, okay? Where the conflict is a low priority. For example, maybe the conflict is between should the toilet seat be up or should the toilet seat be down? Is it really worth sort of breaking one's head over? Probably not. And it may not be the right time or place to take up that conflict, okay? Or you might need more time to think and gather some information. So premature engagement in a conflict may not be the best thing to do. And also, if the other side, from a power dynamics point of view, and the approach that they're bringing into the equation where there is potentially, danger involved in terms of taking an approach to dealing with that conflict, you might want to avoid the conflict. For example, if you get stopped by a police officer on a highway, it's probably best not to pick up a fight with that police officer. Would you guys agree? It's something that could actually be a dire consequence if that's, taken up, right? What are some potential outcomes when we try to avoid conflict? It can fester or spin out of control. We could lose previous gains. It can be taken as an agreement. It may require more time or energy later. Typically, when you avoid a conflict, it results in a lose-lose outcome. It may appear like it's a lose for you, but maybe a win for the other person. Actually, it's not, because the conflict never really got resolved. It eventually will become a lose-lose proposition. The next approach is what's called accommodating, okay? Here, you yield to the other party. You have a desire to maintain harmony, so to speak, and you may have a respect for a relationship, and you may be really genuinely feel happy by satisfying, meeting other people's needs, okay? Now, we all probably have encountered people like this in our lives. For me, my mother comes to mind. She was always trying to please other people at the expense of her own needs, at the expense of her own, things that should be, taken into account. Now, when is it appropriate? Again, the conflict is maybe not so important. And you might feel that the relationship is more important than trying to really get into resolving that conflict. And the conflict may be there because of some mistake, an error, and something that you did wrong, okay? That may be a time when you admit to it and then effectively take an accommodating approach to resolving that conflict. And the only other option is an undesirable butting of heads, and that may not be the most desirable under the circumstance. This may be appropriate. Now, what are some potential outcomes if you take this approach? If you keep taking this approach over and over again, there is a risk of abuse, okay? In fact, in many abusive relationships, conflicts, one side always ends up sort of yielding to the other, maybe because there may be even some level of either physical or mental or verbal violence involved, okay? Now, again, if we keep doing this over and over again, we're going to lose our self-confidence and we're going to lose our credibility. And it's really difficult to convert this into a win-win outcome later on. The outcome here basically is a lose and a win. Win to the other side, lose to your side. Third approach is a compromising approach. Characteristics are give and take, valuing fairness, agreeable to win some and lose some. You know, you often hear a phrase, you win some, you lose some, okay? Minimally acceptable to each party, and the relationship tend to be undamaged when we take a compromising approach. Now, this may be appropriate when the goals are moderately important, and it may be an intermediate step in terms of a complex issue. And in a way of building trust, you know, you might want to sort of take this intermediate step. And there is a time factor involved. Things need to move on. You know, you can't take forever to resolve that. Again, the potential outcomes are the outcome may be less than satisfactory. It may degenerate into a lose-lose. It probably will not build trust in the long run. And you might need to watch out that the compromise is being adhered to, that the people are not taking the compromise and saying, okay, let me get one more step into in your side, so to speak. And it's a partial win-lose, okay? There's a little bit of win, there's a little bit of lose for all sides involved. The next approach is a competing approach, okay? Where kind of butt heads, you know, like here is a, you know, lock arms. And conflict is seen as a win-lose situation, okay? And there's an orientation of a zero-sum orientation. You know, you win, I lose. Okay, I win, you lose. And arguments and insults and accusations and even violence to intimidate may be part of this interaction. And it really is a win-lose power struggle, if you will. Now, is it appropriate? You may find it strange, but there may be certain circumstances in which less forceful methods are ineffective and don't work, and this may be the only way to sort of make something happen. You need a quick resolution and the force may be justified. And the conflict is a long-lasting conflict. How do you think countries get into wars? It's because of this way of approaching a conflict. How do you think, like, you know, when there are protesters out there in the street and maybe they're destroying property, what is the approach that the police is taking? They're taking this approach. They're saying, we are more powerful. We're gonna tear gas you or something like that. And it may be appropriate in the certain circumstances. And that's one way to sort of resolve conflict. Typically, when force is used, there's a deep damage to the relationship. And often the conflict escalates. One of the greatest, deficiencies of this approach is that it fails to recognize possibilities, things that could be different. And for anybody who engages in this type of conflict resolution, it can be truly exhausting, okay? And it is a win-lose outcome. Remember, the accommodating is a lose-win outcome. This is exactly the opposite of that. Anytime there is an accommodation, there is actually a competing going on. Conversely, when there is competing is often met with an accommodating type of thing. Now, by now you should have guessed that the approach that is the desirable approach is a cooperative approach. And the characteristics are, it has equal levels of assertiveness and at the same time empathy, okay? I think you guys went through a session called Being Assertive, where you're trying to balance between your needs and wants and your rights and the other person's needs and wants and their rights, and trying to find the ground where both of you can be satisfied. Now, what's really fascinating about this approach is it expands the range of possible options for resolving the conflict. And the conflict is seen as an opportunity to exercise creativity from both sides. And this can work only if both sides are willing to collaborate, okay? If one side is willing to collaborate, the other side is like my way or highway, it's not going to work. Okay. So this is, does have requirements in terms of when it'll work. Now, when is it appropriate? Consensus and commitment matter. The nature of the conflict is such that it's a high stake conflict, and it is good to arrive at a consensus, good to arrive at a commitment to the solution. Collaborative and trustworthy environment, okay? Now, I gotta be honest with you, many environments are not collaborative nor trustworthy, and I'm talking about workplace environments. In many workplace environments, you may not have the collaboration and the trustworthiness. And long-term relationship matters, okay? When you do resolve conflict this way, the process can be long and taxing, and it may not be suitable under time pressure, but what you end up with is a win-win. Typically, the relationships get to be stronger, okay? So there are a lot of positive things towards that. Now, with all of these things, let's take a quick look at where you guys landed in terms of the quiz, okay? This is as of like maybe, I don't know, 45 minutes ago. Let me see if anybody else took the quiz since then. Yes, in fact, a few more people took the quiz. And when I looked at this, I thought, why do these guys need a session on conflict resolution? Looks like you guys are really absolutely masters of resolving conflicts, because nearly 60% of you on an average are adopting the collaborative approach to conflict resolution, followed by the compromising approach, which is a partial, win-win, a partial win-lose, okay? So combine that, that's like 78%, like nearly 80%. So I think we can stop this session now because you guys are really, really good. Or you are not being truthful to yourself, maybe. Or a significant proportion of you have not taken the quiz, okay? Remember all the different conflicts that you guys came up with? One of the exercises that you can go through, later today at home or maybe tomorrow and stuff like that is take your conflict and examine what sort of an approach are you trying to take in terms of resolving that conflict. You don't have to tell anybody else except Swami, okay, to see, what approach you might be taking. But I have to say, if this is truly reliable and believable, hats off to you guys. You are already very mature in terms of how you approach conflict. And so given that, we're going to spend some time in terms of maybe how you can improve even from where you are to more and more effective ways of approaching conflict. Now, the key word is effective. And effectiveness, after nearly 4 decades of being out there in the world and working in companies and dealing with both life challenges as well as, corporate and company and work challenges and all of that, I come to believe that there are basically 2 fundamental things for a person in terms of, determining effectiveness. The first is really growth mindset, okay? Believing that your most basic abilities can be developed through intention and attention. Intention is sankalpa, attention is dedication, determination, perseverance, right? All of those things. That's what attention is. You put in the effort. And the second thing that I'm a big believer in is the 7 habits of highly effective people. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will, take them through you when we talk about how it is relevant to the conflict resolution. I'll just build out the tree for now. There are these 7 plus 1. There's actually 8 habits also. And each of these habits has a bearing upon conflict resolution. Okay, for example, habit 1, be proactive. What it says is accept responsibility for your own actions. Be in charge of your own moods and choices. Focus on things you can control or influence. Okay, that's what habit number 1, being proactive, is. What it doesn't say is blame the other person. Blame your fate. Blame your parents. Blame your spouse, right? You take responsibility. Habit number 2 is begin with the end in mind. Know what's most important to you. Think ahead in time, where you want to be, and from there backtrack, right? Set meaningful goals, have a plan to accomplish them. All of those are part of habit number 2. Habit number 3 is putting first things first. Do your most important things first. Have the discipline to stick to your goals. Say no to things that distract you from achieving your best. Okay. I will not go through the other ones right now. I'll just take them through when we go to the more detailed section. But there's a fundamental question that you could ask yourself. Okay, Ranga, just you came up with these things as being relevant to being effective and all of that. Has Swami said anything about any of these? How does what Swami has been teaching us forever, how does it relate to these dimensions of effectiveness? Okay, let's take the growth mindset. Swami has always talked about purity, patience, and perseverance, the 3 P's. And he says success is guaranteed. That relates very much to that growth mindset. When we say Brahmarpanam prayer, it is, in my mind, it actually relates to the growth mindset very strongly, because you're recognizing that you have a certain role, there's a universe has a certain role, and you dedicate your action, your effort to whatever it is that, whatever your action that you think you're doing is actually being done by the universe, right? That's what Brahmarpanam means. It means that everything is Brahman. And so when we take that perspective, you're actually taking the growth mindset, because you are not separate from that whole. And so with the right intention, if you set out to do things with purity, patience, and perseverance, then whatever is the right result is going to come up. Habit number 7, sharpen the saw. Swami has said something about this. Daily meditation and prayer, devotional singing, community service, study of Sai literature. Habit 1, be proactive. Why fear when I'm here? Follow the master, face the devil, fight to the end, finish the goal. All of these pertain to be proactive, habit number 1. Habit number 2, Swami says, who am I? Begin with the end in mind. What Swami says is recognize you are the very embodiment of the divine. And at the same time, you also realize your finiteness. So there is this uncertainty, inherent uncertainty in our human existence. We are both very finite and very infinite at the same time. Swami says, I'm I. And he's given these 5 values, right? Truth, right conduct, peace, love, and nonviolence. All of these are part of habit number 2. And habit 3, putting first things first. It's all about sealing on desires. Thinking win-win, habit number 4 is samasta lokas sukhino bhavantu. Habit number 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Swami made it even simpler. Talk less, work more. Habit 6, synergize. You all remember the study circle prayer, Sahana Bhavatu, Sahana Bhunaktu. It is about both of us together achieving and growing and learning, right? So it relates to habit number 6. Habit number 8 is finding your voice and inspiring others to find theirs. And Swami summarizes that very simply: love all, serve all, help our, hurt never. Now, I'm not going to elaborate on these. Each one of these are sutras. There are aphorisms. You can take any one of these and you can meditate on it for a long time to gain more and more insight into how these things relate to each other. But we're going to get to be a little bit practical in terms of what we're going to do. I talked about growth mindset as being something very important for conflict resolution. And I know that Arun took you through growth mindset, I think last week. And so we won't dwell on this very much. Fundamentally, if you believe intelligence and abilities are static, then you're in a fixed mindset. If you believe that you can develop them through your effort, then you're in the growth mindset. In fixed mindset, you have a desire to look smart, and therefore you do a number of things. Whereas in the growth mindset, you have a desire to learn, And so you have a certain things that you do. For example, when you encounter challenges, you want to run away from challenges if you're fixed, whereas you embrace challenges if you're in the growth mindset. Any obstacles, give up easily under fixed, whereas you persist in the face of setbacks. Level of effort that you need. Typically in a fixed mindset, you say, it's pointless, fruitless. Why are we doing this? Growth mindset, hey, effort is the path to mastery. You receive criticism. Arun talked about feedback last week. Someone is giving you feedback that is criticism. If you're in a fixed mindset, you ignore useful negative feedback. Whereas in a growth mindset, you learn from criticism. Success of others, you feel threatened by the success of others, or you find inspirations and lessons from the success of others. The result of all of these is, in a fixed mindset, we basically stop growing, stop learning, stop expanding. And by the way, this applies to what Swami says, love is for expansion. If we take a fixed mindset to that aspect, we can basically not do that. If we think that, love all applies to all Sai devotees and not the other people that are not Sai devotees, then again, we are making love be a fixed one rather than an expanding one, right? On the fixed and on the growth mindset, you're going to continue to grow and develop. Now, how does all that aspects of growth mindset apply to conflict resolution? When you believe that most basic abilities can be developed through attention and intention, you are deciding to go resolve the conflict in the best manner possible is a growth mindset. Okay? Not resolve it in the way I want, not resolve it in the way you want, but resolve it in the best way that is best for all the people involved in it, right? That's growth mindset. Now, how about habit number 1? Habit number 1, when you set your intention to resolve the conflict, you're being proactive. And here is something very important. Any thoughts, words, or actions on your part that may have led to the conflict, you have to be willing to own up to it. Okay? That is habit number 1. You're not trying to defend it. You acknowledge, hey, that was not a good thought. That was not a good word. That was not a good action. And if it is with somebody else, we're going to have to say, I need to, apologize for that. I forgot to mention one thing with respect to how growth mindset comes into conflict resolution. Typically, conflicts that are within yourself are really conflicts between your growth mindset and your fixed mindset. Let's pause and think about that a little bit. Internal conflicts are often between your growth mindset and your fixed mindset. And you do need to have a conversation between these two sides in order to resolve that conflict. Okay, so that's one of the ways in which also growth mindset comes into the picture in conflict resolution. So habit number 2, beginning with the end in mind, before you set out to resolve the conflict, remember and reflect on what your strategic goals are. Because with respect to the strategic goals in mind, you had to make a conscious choice of the approach that you're going to take to resolve the conflict. Okay? This is really important because often we jump into resolving a conflict without thinking through what our strategic goals are, and then you can't pull out of it because now in the thick of argument, in the thick of debate, could be with your spouse, it's often with your spouse, it could be with a coworker, it could be with your manager. If we reflect on what our strategic goals are, then you may take a different approach to how am I going to, resolve this conflict. Habit number 3, putting first things first, doing the most important things first, look at your outcomes that you desire and sort of analyze them in terms of, is it not urgent? Is it not important? Or is it urgent and not important? Urgent and important? Or non-urgent and important? Okay? Depending on your outcome and what category it falls under in terms of putting first things first, the approach that you may need to take is different. Okay? Later on, you're going to do an exercise where you're going to take your conflict and you're going to try to consciously apply growth mindset and habit 1, 2, and 3 to determine what approach you want to take to resolving the conflict. I think we'll have time for that. Okay? Habit number 4, thinking win-win, is having the courage to stand up for your wants and needs and being considerate of others' needs and wants, seeking mutual benefit. Habit number 4 is all about being assertive, engaging in conversations with the style of an assertive conversation. By the way, many people think of assertive as being aggressive. It's not. Assertive is really being, having the courage to stand up for what your needs and wants are, being considerate of others' needs and wants. That's being assertive. So with respect to conflict resolution, you're setting the intention to reach a balanced resolution to the conflict. Not that I win, you lose, not you win, I lose, but to achieve a win-win. Be willing to let go entirely of your position to make room for creatively conceiving of a third way. Not my way, not your way, the third way. And you declare your willingness to work towards that up front. Okay, many people think that if you declare it up front, it's like a weakness, but it really is not. Because most people want to be harmonious in terms of trying to resolve a conflict. They're not trying to break the relationship or something like that. So if you take proactively the first step saying, hey, I really want to work towards coming up with a solution that is going to be win-win for all sides, and it's going to be something that we're all going to be happy with, I think most people will react positively to that. Habit 5, seeking first to understand and then to be understood, is to diagnose the problem before prescribing a solution, listening with your ears and eyes and heart, and presenting your thoughts, clearly with that understanding of the other side, right? So with respect to conflict resolution, listening to the other party with attention and empathy, you have to set your intention to do that. Always restate their position to their satisfaction before stating your own point of view, and sincerely be willing and able to be influenced by the other party. For most of us, our fixed mindset in the form of our ego comes and says, no, don't do that, right? You don't have to tell me. You can really, go have a conversation with the man or the woman in the mirror and ask yourself, how sincere are you and willing are you and able to be influenced by the other side? Okay, I don't know about you guys. Many times I find that I'm actually a bit closed about that. And until I recognize it and say, okay, I'm consciously going to open myself up to be influenced by the other person, it's kind of hard to come to a good solution that's going to be effective. Now, habit number 5 is all about listening. I don't know about you guys. Listening is not easy. Okay? There's many levels of listening. There's the listening where you ignore the other person. Okay? There's the listening, first of all, before we go there, 2 dimensions for listen. How much do I care to understand you? Okay? The respect and consideration I am willing and able to bring into the conversation to be influenced by you. That's the how much do I care. How much do I focus is the attention and energy I'm willing and able to bring into the conversation to be influenced by you. Okay, both dimensions are important. And if I'm basically ignoring, I am way low on both of those dimensions. I'm just texting to somebody else while you're talking to me. I just put myself on mute and maybe shut the video down while I do Slack chat with somebody else, right? So how much understanding do you think you develop when you are engaged in listening like that? None, right? The next level is pretending to listen, which is, we've all experienced that, right? Where you said something and your spouse says, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then you say, okay, what did I say? I said, well, I don't remember. Or they say something that's not really what you said, right? Your focus is almost entirely on yourself, but you're kind of pretending to, listen to them by nodding and smiling, but you're not following anything of what is being said. And typically your responses are generic and meaningless. Selective listening takes one level forward, Your objective is to figure out what to agree with and what to disagree with, and then you tune out the rest, okay? There's a lot of autobiographical responses. You know, whatever the other person says, you're saying, oh yeah, you know, like I did this sometime back, right? You're always trying to come back with something related to you while the other person is saying something. You evaluate, you probe, you advise, you interpret everything from your perspective. And again, you're really interested in seeking to be understood first. Attentive listening is similar to the previous one, but it adds a little bit of empathic listening there, like mimicking content and rephrasing content, still primarily seeking to be understood first. But as empathic listening, you're absorbed in what is being said. You're inferring what's being left out, what's being felt. You're connecting the dots. You're seeking to discover the meaning and the feeling behind the other person's words, the tone of voice, the nonverbal cues that they're sending you, right? Also, you're aware that people often say something that's not really what they mean. Feelings are often disguised behind non-feeling words, okay? Now, the way you respond here in terms of that conversation is mimicking, rephrasing, reflecting, rephrasing and reflecting the feeling, and the best of all, being silent, listening with your ears, with your eyes, most important, with your heart. Very, very challenging to do, but try it. It's quite an experience. So your understanding gets deeper and deeper as you progress into this, you know, empathic listening continuum. So listening, levels of listening is very, very important because that is diagnosing the problem for what it really is before you can come up with the solution, right? The last one here, sorry. Last one is habit number 6, not quite last. Habit number 6 is synergize. Valuing people's differences, particularly their strengths, combining your thinking with their thinking to create third alternatives, right? You're engaging in brainstorming on potential third alternatives. You agree on the dimensions that will be used to assess the alternatives. And you assess and prune the alternatives down to the most promising ones and enjoying the process and the outcome. Those of you who have gone through design thinking in your workplace in terms of coming up with some very creative solutions, what you're doing is you're synergizing. Believe it or not, you can actually take that approach also to conflict resolution. Habit number 7 is sharpen the saw, which is to find balance in life, avoid burnout, striving for continuous improvement of body, mind, heart, and soul. Now, why is that important from a conflict resolution point of view? Because any conflict resolution is going to induce stress in you. And you need to be aware of that. The process is going to create stress. You need to relieve the stress by engaging in regular practices of renewal and recharging your body, your mind, your heart, and soul. One of my favorite approaches to this, whenever I'm dealing with a real, thorny conflict, is I talk to Swami. When I sit down in the morning for meditation or something, I say, Swami, I need your help. I'm getting drained. I don't know how to solve this. I need some inspiration. Swami never lets you down. Habit number 8, find your voice, inspiring others to find theirs. With respect to conflict resolution, this is pretty straightforward. Develop your skills and confidence in resolving conflicts using cooperative style toward win-win outcomes, and be a role model for others, coach them, mentor them, so they can develop their own abilities and feel confident, okay? Now, I know I have given you a bit of a fire hose of growth mindset and the 7 habits and how it applies to conflict resolution. What I'd like you to do now is, remember you came up with your own conflict examples. So I'm going to send you another Jamboard room. and I think you should be able to access it. And what I'd like you to do is take your conflict, your own conflict. You know it, and even if you didn't write down your conflict, it's okay. You know it's a conflict that is of interest to you. But what I would like you to do is the following thing. Take a growth mindset perspective and consciously take the first 3 habits, and using that, come up with what conflict resolution approach that you are going to take to your conflict. And describe your reasoning process and your decision on the approach that you'll take to resolving the conflict. This one is an individual exercise, and we might call maybe 1 or 2 people. I don't know that we'll have a lot of time to call a lot of people. So let's take the next 5 minutes to do this, okay? Take your conflict and we apply your habit 1, 2, and 3 and growth mindset to say what specific conflict resolution approach you're going to take to resolving that conflict. Because remember that each approach may be appropriate under certain circumstances, but it should be reasoned on the basis of those first 3 habits. Okay, Madhu, if you don't mind, start a timer for 5 minutes. We don't need to break them out into separate rooms. And if you feel comfortable, summarize it in a sticky in the Jamboard. Okay, so I see a few post-its, where people have analyzed their conflicts. This process that you kind of went through, it is actually something that, with respect to your real conflict, it's actually a good idea to engage in that before you set out to resolve the conflict with the other side, okay? Often we jump into trying to resolve the conflict before we have really come to grips with it within ourselves. Remember, conflict resolution with another side can take place best when you come to a bit of a resolution within yourself first. And going through these first 3 habits and how they might apply to your conflict gets it clear in your mind about what's really important to you and what's the approach that you want to take. So you're much better prepared to now engage in the habit 4, 5, and 6 in terms of resolving the conflict. Okay, so I'm looking at the clock. Madhu, I think we are set to end in another 10 minutes. Am I right?
That's right, Uncle. We do have 30 extra minutes for Q&A though.
Yeah, right. So what I would like to do is skip this, and we will be sharing the deck out with you guys. And here is a clip from movie Lincoln, where Lincoln and Stevens are going through a conversation where they're trying to resolve a conflict, believe it or not, even though when you read it, it may not immediately be apparent. And I think we have shared the transcript for the conversation. I think it will be very instructive for you guys as a way of sort of internalizing any learnings from this session, to listen to the clip, read through that transcript, and then try to think through what's the thoughts and feelings on each of these people's part, Lincoln's part and Stephen's part. The thoughts and feelings are not what is expressed, right? They're you're inferring what may be the thoughts and feelings, but what was actually said by the individuals, and were they taking a certain approach in terms of how they were approaching this conflict? Were they adopting a certain technique, right? I mean, in terms of how they were, listening or explaining their position versus understanding the other person's position. Okay, so it's, I think, instructive to go through a dissection, an analysis of that conversation. The reason I'd recommend that you do that is by doing the analysis of somebody else's conversation or somebody else's conflict, you actually are building your muscle in your brain to deal with your own conflicts, okay? Any conflict that you have to deal with. It's to deal with your own conflict, there's often emotion involved, and you may not be able to bring your best self to deal with it. Whereas if you are looking at somebody else's conflict or something that happened in the past, you can be more objective. And by exercising that objectivity and analytical ability, you're going to strengthen your, the right muscles within your brain. The neuroplasticity will come to work, and you will be able to, do better analysis of that. So to summarize, being able to resolve conflicts effectively, it is very essential skill. It's both the core life skill, it's as well as a leadership skill. It is especially important as a leadership skill. Most important takeaway that I would like you for this session is, it doesn't matter where you think you are with respect to effective conversations or effective conflict resolution. You can always learn and improve your skills by consciously applying both the growth mindset and the 7 habit principles or the 8 habit principles of effectiveness. You can make yourself, improve your abilities. Now, the key determinants of that is that you have a good understanding of how to have assertive, effective conversations, balanced between both sides. And of course, nothing will be as valuable as regular preparation and practice. I would encourage you to, even when you finish this session, when you go out and do something else, and interact with other people, just be attuned to a conflict that arises and immediately think in terms of, what is the approach I want to take to resolving this conflict? Don't let it be a reflexive response. Let it be a conscious response, okay? Being mindful of what are you faced with, what approach do you want to take, and how does it relate to your overall goals? How does it relate to Swami's teachings? All of that kind of comes into the picture, okay? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uncle. That was a wonderful session. Give me 1 second so I could share my screen as well. Thank you so much, Uncle. First of all, we wanted to take this opportunity on behalf of everyone that's attending today's session. Thank you. I think it was extremely useful. Like personally speaking, we learned a lot about the various conflict resolution approaches, avoiding, accommodating, compromising, competing, and cooperating, and how the cooperative conflict resolution approach involves collaboration and provides a wide range of possible options to be in a win-win situation at the end of it. And it was really nice to see all those 7 habits that you spoke about, and you also added one more to it. So I think we'll all learn a lot just going back and looking at the recording of this session once again. Thank you again. It was awesome working with you throughout this whole process, and we look forward to more such sessions with you in the future.
Thank you.
So with that, so we'll share the feedback form with you guys. So we request you to please provide your feedback. And then next week, we have a strategy development session by Mr. Sunil Kasturi. So please do register if you haven't. And this is the registration link. I'm sure you all are familiar with it by now. And if you have any other questions, please do reach out to us at elws.ssio@gmail.com, or you can ping Ritesh, Rishma, Kshitij, or myself at any time. So with this, before formally closing the session, we just wanted to share that we are going to, Dr. Ranga has agreed to provide us with 30 extra minutes for extended Q&A. So if you all have any questions, please do stay back and we'll end with closing prayers after the Q&A. So please feel free to post your questions in the chat box or raise your hand, and it's going to be a pretty informal Q&A session. Okay, we have Santosh first. Santosh, please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the wonderful session. So really helpful. My question is the listening part. I really like the stages that you have, and being empathic listener is really hard. But a lot of that is also depends on the speaker. So your speaker may put you back, even though you're trying to be the best, you're trying to be empathetic. So how can we balance? Speaker may put you back on the track, or maybe losing the track, and it may not be properly expressing his thoughts.
That's a great question, Santosh. Thank you for bringing that up. I mean, in an ideal world, everybody would be very respectful and considerate of each other, so that the process of collaborating, the process of listening to each other would be easy. But then if that were the case, Swami would be terribly bored, because there will be no tamasha in life, you know, if people are not going to be difficult, so to speak. Now, the way I'm going to now, maybe most of these responses, I'm going to bring more Swami's teachings into it. You know, in the session, I kind of left it at a sort of a tangential level. But here is the way I have come to see when I'm encountering someone who is making it very difficult for me to be my best self. Okay. Swami says, if you find a fault in another, that's because the fault exists in you. Correct yourself first. And so when I encounter a difficult person in terms of the interaction, after the initial shock or initial sort of, you know, adverse or negative reaction, I remember this, and then I realize, okay, this is really Swami come to reform me, to refine me, to shape me. And so internally I say, okay, Swami, thank you for making a special visit to me. And from there on, I do my best, but not worry about what exactly the outcome turns out to be. Does that make sense? I try my very best to listen to the other person, practice the empathic listening in terms of reflecting and, you know, rephrasing what I'm hearing. Sooner or later, and what I'm doing when I do that is I'm practicing love all. I'm bringing love into the equation. What I've experienced is that sooner or later, that love breaks down that barrier. People that you least expect are going to have a little different interaction with you. Maybe not in that interaction, but a subsequent interaction, they are different than what they were in the first interaction. So what I'm saying is remain proactive, habit number one. Being proactive has nothing to do with the other person. You remain in your circle of influence, and your circle of influence is, you know what? I am going to listen to you. You're making it very hard for me to do that, but Swami, help me. I'm going to listen to you.
Got it.
Thank you, Uncle. So we have a couple of questions in the chat. Ganapati, do you want to ask it yourself?
Sure. Just wanted to understand, how would collaboration be different from an approach of compromise?
Very good question. And you're also saying collaboration will most likely involve compromise, right? The way I differentiate it is this. When you're trying to take a compromising approach, you're primarily doing it from the point of view, okay, tell me what your list of your demands are. I'll put down the list of my demands, and then we're going to do horse trading. Okay, I'll give you this, you give me that. I'll give you this. There is no real attempt at understanding why you want those things from me. Okay. In a collaborative approach, you're not into the bartering, horse trading. What you're saying is, brother, sister, spouse, whoever, right? I want to understand where you're coming from. I want to listen to where you're coming from. I really want to understand, you know, where these demands or needs are coming from. Could we do that? Because once you understand them, you might find your list is no longer either necessary or relevant. Does that make sense, Ganapati? It's coming from a place of understanding versus bartering.
Got it. Although we might be compromising on something, it doesn't. It's not perceived like a compromise because our
That's
perspective might
exactly
change.
right. That's exactly right. The compromise is with respect to your initial position. Your refined position based upon a better understanding of the other side, it's no longer a compromise because you realize maybe you are being unreasonable. Maybe you are being, you know, didn't understand something about where they were coming from. You just didn't know. So what position you had and the new position that you've adopted, you've done it lovingly and willingly. When you do willingly and lovingly adopt something, it's not a compromise. It's an acceptance. Acceptance and compromise are two different things.
Thank you.
Thanks, Uncle. Rasika or Vishwa, do you want to go next?
Sairam Uncle, thank you for the wonderful session. So one question which I had, this is in context with the PG&E exercise in the video which you showed. So I have that constant conflict, when we try to talk to people and try convincing them about something, if they are actually at a higher power dynamic and if they're not ready to buy into whatever you're ready to say. So what kind of conflict management approach would we take in that case? Would it still be collaborative? Because
very good question. Okay, when there is huge differential in power dynamics, okay, it can become very difficult to be in a cooperative mode. And this is where the spiritual dimension sort of comes in. Lord, give me the courage to change the things that I can. The forbearance to accept the things that I cannot, and the wisdom to know the difference. And this is, when you're faced with a situation like that, it calls for some deep introspection to see, is this something that you can really change? Or is this something that you need to accept and move on? Or if it is not acceptable, to then move away from that toxic situation, okay? I have been personally in situations where a work environment becomes so toxic that a meaningful resolution of that conflict is not possible. With that clarity in mind and no malice towards the other side, I say, thank you, I'm going to go my way now. Does that make sense? So you are adopting a conflict resolution approach where you are clear in your heart about why you did what you did. There's no more conflict inside you as to why you left.
So, Uncle, in this case, who actually won in that PG&E thing in the end? What was the consensus which was reached in the end? I didn't get.
I think you should watch the movie. It's a really great movie.
Watch the movie, so we don't know what's the answer finally. So yeah.
No, you'll know in the movie. I mean, I don't want to give a spoiler to others that might be now inspired to watch that movie. It's a great movie. It's actually based on real. It's based on real life, and actually Erin is an amazing character. She went on then to take on this type of social justice issues, and I would really encourage you. It's a really time well spent in terms of watching the movie. Sure. And by the way, PG&E is still up to the tricks. okay, with respect to, the recent fires and the settlement with respect to the fires and all that, okay? It's very hard for corporations to change their core value system, and that is still at work.
Okay, uncle. And just allow me to ask only one final question, uncle. So here, when I did talk to my father regarding one of the recent conflicts, so he has quite a lot of negative perception about himself. So I tried convincing him about his value, about his inherent worth. So what if somebody doesn't actually refuse to keep buying into one's own self-worth? What if we have a high regard, but if that other person is on a self-esteem? So there is this constant conflict within my mind of whether to go and convince him or whether to just accept him as just how it is. So how do
Love him unconditionally. Your love is going to convince him of his inherent worth.
Okay, sure. Thanks, uncle.
Think about it, like you are not conditioning your love based upon his perception of his self-worth, right? Swami talks about this unconditional love. Often people that have that sense about themselves that they're not worth it, they're coming from a place of deep hurt and trauma and other things in their life. And the thing that really energizes them, heals them, is only one thing that can heal them. That's unconditional love. That's what Swami has done it again and again and again to all of us, right? Very few of us are really worthy of the love that Swami has showered on us. Yet he did. And that's how he helped us recognize our own self-worth by recognizing he is inside us. How can we not value ourselves?
Thank you so much, uncle.
Right. Do you want to ask your next question?
Sure. So this was already sort of answered in the previous question, but my question was, when a discussion is not possible, when the other party or individual is conflict avoidant, what are the options then?
It will require more work. I mean, in other words, let me just say this, let me just step back a little bit. When someone is trying to avoid facing up to a conflict, there could often be, if there is no power dynamic issue involved, there might actually be a trust issue, okay? One of the things that Stephen Covey emphasizes in terms of habit number 3, putting first things first, and also habit number 4, is that in relationships, you need to be regularly depositing into the trust bank. If the trust bank is overdrawn, then a person is going to want to avoid you, is going to want to not take up conflicts with you. So when you see that in the other person, it should actually be a call for examining how much deposits am I making in the trust account of that relationship, and to start depositing, making the deposit without expecting the other side to deposit. Start putting the deposit. It might be in the negative territory. It might have to be first brought up to 0 and then maybe positive, and that may evoke a change in the other side. But don't do it with that expectation. Do it because this is how you live up to Swami's injunction of love all, serve all, help all, hurt never. And if the relationship then turns around, that's an icing on the cake, okay? That makes sense. I hope I'm not, I hope I picked up on what you were highlighting there.
I think so. So my understanding is that to, without expectation, to cultivate a peace with the other party, even without the discussion.
Yeah, but be careful. That doesn't mean that you're giving the license to the other party to start taking advantage of you or abusing you or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Makes
You're
sense.
still being assertive in the sense that you respect your rights and needs and wants. At the same time, you are compassionate and considerate of others' rights and needs and wants. And if there is this trust issue, start making deposits into the trust bank.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Uncle. Riaz, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. First, thanks, Uncle. This was very, very helpful. So the question I have in mind is, so there are many situations in day-to-day scenarios at work where you'd want to be in a win-win situation, but sometimes when you're in product or when you're in sales, you'd be up against a competitor or some scenarios where the outcome of that event is going to be a win or lose scenario, right? I personally don't enjoy being in that situation, but if at all we encounter those type of scenarios, like what would be your guidance on how to encounter it?
Excellent question. You're talking about like scenarios where there is a winner and there is a loser, okay?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, in the deeper sense, when I think about it, there is no actual winner or loser, right? It's all
Exactly. You are right on, Riaz. Okay. The thing is this, there is a certain label that we provide to an outcome as a win and a lose. And that is real. That is part of what life is and all of that. Okay. You can win by the way you lose. Let me give you an example. Maybe it's a competitive sales situation. You're there in the account and the other side is there in the account. How you interact with the client, how you treat the client putting you into situations where they kind of pitting you against the other side is going to be noticed by the client. Okay. While in this particular transaction, maybe you lost, they won, but they see that you are a person of character. You never spoke ill of the other side in trying to promote what product and service that you were trying to bring to the table. Okay. You were highly respectful of the other side. You listened far better to the real problem that the customer was trying to solve. You connected with it a lot deeper. You're a lot more helpful. You're a lot more consultative to the client. All those things will be noticed. Sometimes you lose in the short run to win big in the long run. And internally, you didn't lose because you didn't lose to your fixed mindset. You didn't lose to your non-values. You stuck to your values. You stuck to your growth mindset. And you stuck to considering and treating others with respect and compassion and consideration. And what Swami promises us is that that is the right way for us to go through life. Even if in the short run, there may not be a so-called, positive or a win outcome. And by the way, that same and the situation, after you lose, if you go back to the client and say, hey, would you be open to a conversation where I respect totally the decision that you made, and I really would like to learn from this situation in terms of what are things that I could have done differently, what was deficient in our product and offerings. We would really, really appreciate if you could give us a little bit of time. Most clients and most customers would deeply respect that. And if you go in there with, again, absolutely the intention to listen, to learn, and to understand that client and customer, the next time they're going to think of you first. And by the way, your next situation with the next customer, you're going to be better positioned to be able to win that.
Got it. Thanks so much, Uncle. That was very helpful.
Sanjana, do you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. Sarah Ranga uncle, this has been a very eye-opening and enlightening session. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this. My question was, and I think you've answered it quite a bit in your previous answers, but should we consider changing our method of conflict resolution, the three that you just mentioned, if we do not see the kind of outcome we desire or hope for repeatedly, especially to people in power or even people who are our peers?
Absolutely. Okay. I didn't elaborate on that. There's actually probably a clip that I can share with the Madhu, so she can probably put it in the afterwork later on. Remember the power of listening, the listening levels and all of that. And let us say that, maybe with your manager, maybe with your director, whatever it is, let's say huge power differential, and something that you wanted to accomplish, it didn't go your way. One thing I have found very useful is after that thing is over, in an extremely respectful manner, reaching out to that powerful person saying, I would really appreciate an opportunity for a few minutes to talk to you. And, I would like to learn from, what happened. And I'm not suggesting every person is going to respond positively to that, but many people will, especially if you preface it with a very pithy summary of what you are desiring would come out of that particular situation and stuff like that. But then it happened in a different way. And you really would like to learn from this situation in terms of how you can approach these things differently the next time. And would they be willing to spare you a little bit of time to give you some perspective so that you can benefit from their thing? Now, think about what I'm saying. I could approach it in a different way. I could say, you know what? This person in this powerful position, let me come up with some choice ways of tagging them with, like one of the quizzes had maybe an objectionable way somebody was responding to a situation. So in our own mind, we may have our own choice ways of labeling somebody as, undesirable or objectionable or hateable or whatever it is, right? Now we are coming at them from a fixed mindset point of view. What I just now said before, I'm coming at it from a growth mindset point of view for both myself and the other person. You're thinking win-win. It may not result in what you want in terms of the conversation, but if you're in 10 such situations, I guarantee to you, many of them will respond and say, yeah, let's go grab a coffee and let me talk to you. And if you are truly sitting there listening rather than trying to defend why you didn't, you should have gotten what you wanted, and you're trying to defend your prior position. Instead, you're really listening to the other person, the powerful position, the powerful person. You're also making an impression on them. You're learning something as to where they came from. Remember, many times people that are in positions of power, their context from which they look at a situation is very different from the context from which you're looking at that situation. By definition, by nature, a senior leader is taking into account a lot of other aspects of the situation than perhaps you are. And so if you're willing to listen to them, and then toward the end again, you do in such a meeting, your only objective is to listen to them, not to try to defend your position and all that. If you did that and you summarized your understanding, you thank them, you have made an enormous impression on that leader about who you are, what sort of a character you are. They're going to remember that.
Thank you. So sounds like just truly listening will do the job there, right?
There is one solution for most of our communication problems and conflicts. Listening.
Mm.
And basically listening is an active form of love. Listening with the intent to understand is a very active form of love. Something most of us are not good at, including me.
Thank you so much for that answer.
Thank you. I believe we have one more question. Kshitij?
Yeah, and my question was similar to, I think Ranga uncle already covered that really well with the response to Vishwa and Sanjana, but I had a spin-off question though. So many a times when we're working in a group setting, there are group members who we're not always aligned to the same goals, like be it cross-functional teams, be it within the same group, there could be different agendas that are driving discussions. At a certain point, at least in my personal experience, it's almost become impossible to get your point across or a certain approach taken, which is in the well-being of what your agenda is, without being the loudest voice in the room. And that just feels very conflicting with the if you can't oblige, you can always speak obligingly. So in such toxic work setups, how do you recommend we still be effective in terms of our deliverables, as well as effective as people who can sleep with their own behavior?
Are you in a leadership role in this situation, or are you in a peer role?
A combination of both. There are my peers as well, but there are a lot of folks who are also have to be told what they need to be doing.
So it could be like a project lead, or
exactly.
It could be like a team lead role and all of that. Okay, so that's such a common, scenario. And I can share with you some things that have worked for me, in my work. One of the things that I've tried to do whenever we are faced with a situation like this is to go one-on-one with that person, as opposed to taking them on in a group setting. In a one-on-one situation, often an individual could be very different than when they are in a group setting. And in that one-on-one thing, such a conversation could be, hey, I'm observing, maybe I'm wrong, but from what I see, I feel like you may not be totally aligned with what we're trying to do as a group, but I could be wrong. And I really want to understand whether this is a misperception on my part. And would you say, okay, can we go for a walk and let's just have a conversation? And again, if you are in a bit of a leadership role, you can say, come on, let's go take a walk. Let's take a conversation. You're not giving a choice to the other person. But if you're in a peer relationship, you're still respectful and say, okay, when can we maybe go for a little, coffee or a chai or, chat, right? And again, after stating why you are calling for that interaction, to really try to listen to the other person. Try to reflect back, try to rephrase back. Never bring anything of what point you're trying to get across. I know this, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, because there's a lot of energy in them where they are obsessed with their point of view. The Japanese have a term for that. It's called gasanuki. Gasanuki means letting out gas. And you have to let the other person deflate their energy first, while meeting it with the positive energy of love, namely listening. And often one or two things can happen. When they have had the opportunity to be truly heard and understood, often they recognize you haven't said a thing so far. You've been reflecting back. You've been rephrasing what they're saying. They realize, my God, he really understands where I'm coming from. And they might say, thank you, Kshitij, for listening to me. And I know that I've been a little passive aggressive in terms of not really aligning with. Often when people exhibit such behavior, it is passive aggressive behavior because they don't feel heard. They don't feel valued. And often when that validation is there, they might say, I really probably should change. Or they might say, do you think I'm really totally wrong? Now, because you've been listening and you've been truly willing to be influenced by the other person, you may realize the herd was going in a direction while there is more consensus on it that may not be the right direction. And this one maverick and what they're saying has merit. Now you become a champion for them to align the rest of the team with this is what synergy is. Synergy is not my way, my approach, your approach, but trying to come up with that third way, which is building on the best of both sides. In one of the quiz scenarios, such a thing was there, right? How do you open up COVID-19? Like the group is aligning with something, but you think, there are some problems with it, okay? And now, if the person is taking a passive approach of just simply tuning out, that's not a good thing either, because they may be passive aggressive in trying to actively sabotage the approach. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think that gives me a challenging path ahead as well, where I'll try and implement that.
Absolutely. Without challenge, life would be boring.
Thank you so much.
I don't see any other questions, but I do have one question, Uncle. How do we promote active listening for longer periods of time? Like at work, there are days when we have 6 hours worth of meetings, and it's really hard to listen continuously. Like, what are some of the things that we could do to enable, be able to listen for longer periods of time?
So between meetings, ground yourself. It could be as simple as one conscious, mindful breath. Because the problem is, this is a computer, right? And it gets bombarded with so much input. We got inputs from this, we got input from you, input from somebody else, and meanwhile something goes ping, and something else rings, and something goes ding, right? It's just constant chatter and clutter. You can't listen when there is so much clutter in our brain. And so as simple a thing like one conscious breath, and if you want to spice it up, you can make a 3 Gayatri breath. I don't know if you guys know this, right? You close one nostril, you do one complete Gayatri as you inhale in, close it, do one more Gayatri while you're holding the breath, and then one more Gayatri out. The whole thing takes maybe 1 minute, okay? But that already clears the clutter because you have to survive. So you want to pay attention to the breath, right? I may be sounding like I'm trying to trivialize your challenge, but I'm not, okay? And depending on if you have a little bit more time than just a time for just one breath, you can think about, people often walk into a meeting without having given some thought to, what am I trying to accomplish in this meeting? Being clear about what outcome you seek from that meeting. And the outcome could be as simple as, I want to be a value-adding team member in the conversation. Or it may be a team lead where you're trying to get the team to agree on maybe a particular direction or something like that. And being clear about what goal are you trying to accomplish itself can be valuable to be in a listening mode, but not being too attached to what it is that you think that you want to accomplish. Now, this has to be a practice in meeting after meeting after meeting, Madhu, because in the first meeting, you may be very ineffective with this, what I'm describing. But then let's say you listen, and then you inject in some thoughtful contribution in the meeting. In second meeting and a third meeting and a fourth meeting, when you say something, a couple of people are going to say, Madhu doesn't say something unless she feels strongly about it. So, Madhu, why do you say that? And then maybe someone else says, wait, I think I agree with Madhu. Now you created a catalytic reaction. When you are grounded and we are being mindful, your presence is a mindful presence in the meeting. Your mindfulness draws others to be mindful, because that's like a wave that is permeating the room. Now, you can't be mindful, go into a meeting and say, I'm going to be mindful. We need to practice mindfulness, daily meditation and prayer. That's habit number 7. And when we do that day in and day out, to switch to the mode of being mindful is not effort. You go into the meeting, take one mindful breath, you're there, fully present. If you can bring that fully present self to a meeting, it's going to have an influence on everybody that is present or not present there.
Thank you so much. With that, if there's no other questions, I think we'll end the session. Let me quickly share my screen.
ईश्वराय विद्महे सत्यदेवाय धीमहि तन्नः सर्वप्रचोदयात् ॐ ईश्वराय विद्महे सत्यदेवाय धीमहि तन्नः सर्वप्रचोदयात् ॐ ईश्वराय विद्महे सत्यदेवाय धीमहि तन्नः सर्वप्रचोदयात्